Welcome back to Beyond the Batch. She was laughing at breakfast. 7 hours later, she wasn't breathing. That is the sentence Daniel Brooks could never say out loud without his voice abandoning him completely, because there was no warning, no fever the night before, no stumble, no complaint, no sign that the morning of October 14th would be any different from the 3,000 mornings that had come before it. Lily had sat across from him at the kitchen table in their small house in Aurora, Colorado, her feet swinging beneath the chair because she was 8 years old and her feet did not yet reach the floor, and she had laughed at something on the cereal box, something about a cartoon bear, and Daniel had smiled without looking up from his phone. He had not looked up from his phone. That detail would come back to him later, in the darkness of a hospital room, and it would feel like a splinter buried too deep to remove. By mid-morning, Lily had collapsed in the hallway of her school. By afternoon, she was in the ICU at St. Luke's Medical Center in Denver. By evening, the doctors were using words like idiopathic and neurological shutdown, and we are doing everything we can. And Daniel was sitting in a plastic chair outside room 14 with his hard hat still in his hand, still wearing his construction boots, still carrying the smell of a job site he had walked off the moment his phone rang, and the world he had known that morning was completely, irrevocably gone. Inside room 14, the machines never stopped humming. The heart monitor kept its steady count, not urgent, not hopeful, just routine. And beneath its rhythm, beneath a pale pink blanket that a nurse had brought from somewhere because Lily always slept with pink, lay his daughter, her dark lashes resting against her cheeks, her hands open at her sides, her small chest rising and falling in shallow mechanical breaths. She did not move. She did not speak. She did not wake. For 7 days. Daniel Brooks was a large man, broad shoulders, calloused hands, the kind of physical presence that made other men on job sites feel quietly reassured. He had been a construction worker for 20 years, had poured foundations and raised steel frames, and worked through winters that drove other men indoors, and he had never once in his adult life felt helpless. He felt helpless now. 3 years earlier, he had lost his wife, Renee, on a winter highway outside Denver. Black ice and a truck that crossed the center line, and a phone call that came at 4 in the morning. He had buried her in January with 5-year-old Lily on his hip, the child too young to fully understand and old enough to know that something enormous and irreplaceable had been taken. Daniel had stood at the graveside in the cold and held himself together with everything he had, and he had not broken until he was alone in his truck miles from home, gripping the steering wheel in the dark parking lot of a gas station, weeping in a way he had not known was possible for a grown man. After that, he had worked. Double shifts, night shifts, weekends, every hour of overtime the foreman would give him. He told himself it was for Lily, that every dollar, every aching muscle, every night he came home after she was already asleep was building something solid beneath her feet. He told himself that providing and loving were the same thing, that a good roof and full refrigerator and new school clothes every August were the language of fatherhood, and Lily would understand that someday. But now, sitting in room 14 with her hand in his, he kept hearing a sentence that one of her teachers had said to him months ago at a parent conference, said it gently, almost in passing, the way people say things they hope will land softly. Lily talks about waiting for you to come home. She's a patient little girl. He had nodded and moved on. He had not let himself hear it. He was hearing it now. On the 4th day, a man named Richard Whitmore arrived at the hospital. Whitmore was a tech entrepreneur from San Francisco, the kind of man whose name appeared on the sides of research buildings, who traveled with an assistant and spoke in complete, considered sentences. He had heard about Lily's case through a medical colleague and came quietly, without any press, and sat across from Daniel in the family waiting room with his hands folded. "I want to help," he said, "and I have the resources to do it." He was not exaggerating. Within 24 hours, the room outside the ICU was transformed. Artificial intelligence diagnostic equipment arrived in cases. A team of 6 specialists flew in from different cities. Neural stimulation technology that Daniel had never seen and could not have afforded in 20 years of overtime was installed and calibrated and set to work. Whitmore himself stayed 2 days, checking in every few hours, his face professionally composed and quietly worried. The specialists tested for 48 hours. Then the lead neurologist stood in the hallway outside room 14 and delivered his findings with the careful precision of a man who has learned how to carry bad news without dropping it. "There is no structural damage," he said. "Her brain is not injured. There is no physical reason she should remain unconscious." He paused. "But she is not responding. We do not know why. We have never seen a case quite like this." Richard Whitmore left the following morning. He shook Daniel's hand at the hospital entrance, held it a moment longer than necessary, and said he was sorry. Daniel believed him. He watched the black car pull away into the Denver morning and felt the last thread of external hope leave with it. That night, Daniel sat beside Lily's bed with her worn copy of Charlotte's Web and read to her until his voice gave out. He read about Wilbur and Charlotte and the fair and the words in the web, and his voice broke a dozen times, and the machines kept their count, and outside the window the city moved on the way cities do, indifferent and continuous, and Lily did not stir. It was nearly midnight when the nurse knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "I'm sorry. There's a boy in the lobby. He's been sitting there for almost an hour asking to speak to Lily's father. He won't leave." She hesitated. "He seems, I don't know how to explain it. He seems very certain." Daniel frowned. "A boy?" He walked the long corridor to the waiting area, his boots quiet on the linoleum, the overhead lights pale and humming. And there, against the far wall in a plastic chair, sat a child who looked to be about 11 years old. He was thin. His jacket was far too large for him, the sleeves swallowing his hands, the shoulders drooping. His sneakers were worn through at the toes. His jeans were frayed at the hem. He carried nothing, no phone, no bag, nothing in his hands. He simply sat with his spine straight and his eyes open, and when Daniel entered the room, the boy stood up immediately, with the kind of quiet respect that felt almost old-fashioned. "Are you Lily's dad?" he asked. His voice was calm, unhurried, older than his face had any right to be. "I am," Daniel said. The boy looked at him steadily. "I think I can help her." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. He thought about the neurologists, the AI equipment, the 6 specialists and the man from San Francisco, and 48 hours of the most advanced diagnostics available anywhere in the country. "Son," he said carefully, "some of the best doctors in the world have been trying to help her." The boy nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "I know," he said, "but they were looking at her brain." He paused. "I'm talking about something else." He looked directly at Daniel. "Do you talk to her?" "Every day. I read to her. I tell her about—" "No," the boy's voice was gentle but firm. "I mean the real things, the things you haven't said." He tilted his head slightly. "She can hear you, Mr. Brooks, but she's waiting for something true." The hallway was very quiet. "Sometimes," the boy said quietly, "people don't need medicine to come back. They need to hear the voice of someone they love saying the thing that was never said." Daniel brought him to room 14. He could not have explained why. He was not a man who followed instincts easily, not a man who trusted the unexplainable. But something in that boy's stillness, something in the complete absence of performance or pretense, moved him forward without argument. The boy stood beside Lily's bed. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression on his young face that Daniel would spend years trying to describe and never quite manage. Then he placed one hand gently on the blanket and turned to Daniel. "Tell her what you've been carrying," he said simply. "She's been waiting to hear it." Daniel sat down. He took Lily's hand in both of his. He looked at her face. So still, so terribly peaceful. The face he had been looking at for 7 days and somehow still could not fully accept as the face of someone who might not come back. And for the first time since Renee died, he stopped trying to be strong. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. His voice shook from the very first word, and he let it shake. "I told myself every extra shift was for you. Every missed dinner, every night you fell asleep before I got home. I told myself it was love, that working that hard was the same as being there." He stopped, pressed her hand against his forehead. "But that was a lie I told myself so I didn't have to sit in that house and feel how empty it was without your mama." A tear dropped onto the blanket. "I missed your butterfly play. Your teacher told me you looked for me in the audience 3 times. His voice fractured. "I missed your last birthday dinner. I sent money with Mrs. Carver and told myself that counted." He shook his head. "It didn't count. None of it counted the way I needed it to count." He was weeping now, quietly, the way a man weeps when he has held something for 3 years and his arms have finally given out. "You are the best thing in my life, Lily. You are everything your mama left me and everything I have left to love, and I have been standing on the outside of your childhood looking in and calling it sacrifice." He pressed her hand to his lips. "Please come back. I am here now. I am right here, and I am not going anywhere, I promise you. Please come back to me." The room was absolutely still. And then, the heart monitor changed. The rhythm quickened. Slightly, carefully, unmistakably. The nurse appeared in the doorway with wide eyes and moved to the monitor and looked at the readings and looked at Daniel and looked at the readings again. Daniel turned to thank the boy. The chair by the door was empty. The hallway beyond the glass was empty. The boy was gone. He came back the following afternoon, appearing in the doorway of room 14 as quietly as morning light. Daniel had been watching for him and felt something release in his chest when he saw the worn jacket and the steady eyes. "She responded," Daniel told him. "Her heart rate changed." The boy nodded. "There's one more thing," he said. He sat in the chair by the window, hands folded, unhurried. "Is there a song? Something from when she was very small, something her mother sang?" Daniel went completely still. There was only one. A lullaby Renee had sung every single night of Lily's early life. A quiet, simple song about the moon over the river and the light in the window and finding the way home. Renee had sung it so many times that Lily would mouth the words in her sleep. Daniel had stood in the doorway 100 times watching Renee rock her in the yellow lamplight, listening to that song, memorizing it without meaning to. He had not sung it since the night Renee died. He had not been able to go near it. "I can't," he said. The 2 words came out stripped of everything. The boy looked at him with that expression again, the one too old for his face, patient and certain and without any judgment at all. "It's the sound of home to her," he said softly. "It's the thing that tells her she's safe." Daniel sat beside Lily's bed for a long time without moving. Then he leaned forward, both hands over hers, and he closed his eyes, and he began. His voice was rough and low and broke within the first line, and he almost stopped. But he pushed through the breaking and kept singing. He sang about the moon on the water, and the road winding home, and the window with the light that was always left burning, and his voice cracked and rebuilt and cracked again, and the room filled with something that had not been in it before, the sound of a family that had once been whole, and a father who was finally, fully present. Halfway through the second verse, Lily's fingers moved. Not a reflex, not a tremor. Her hand turned slowly beneath his, and her fingers curled around his hand and held on. The days that followed moved the way grace moves, quietly, without announcement, in increments almost too small to measure, until suddenly the change was undeniable. Lily's brain activity stabilized, her breathing deepened, the color returned to her face like slow sunrise. The nurses moved through room 14 more gently, speaking in lower voices, as if they understood that something fragile and sacred was in the process of being restored. On the 5th morning, a Tuesday, with pale gold October light coming through the hospital window and the first snow of the season dusting the distant mountains, Lily opened her eyes. She blinked. She turned her head. She found her father asleep in the chair beside her, his hand loosely holding hers, his chin to his chest, dark circles beneath his eyes, and 3 weeks of exhaustion written across his face. And in a voice like a single thread of sound, barely there at all, she said the only word that mattered. "Daddy." He woke as though lightning had passed through him. He looked at her, she looked at him, and the sound that came out of Daniel Brooks in that moment was not a word and not a sob, but something between the two, something that had no name, something that happens in a man only once or twice in a lifetime if he is very fortunate. His daughter had come back. He searched for the boy afterward. Asked every nurse, every staff member, every person at the front desk, requested the visitor logs, reviewed what security footage was available. There was no record, no sign-in sheet, no camera image. The hallway outside room 14 showed nothing during the hours the boy had walked through it. Daniel stood in the lobby of St. Luke's with that information and held it quietly. He did not have an explanation. He was not certain he needed one. He knew only this. A boy in a worn jacket and broken sneakers had walked into a hospital where science had done everything it could and come up empty, where money had reached the edge of what it could buy, where a father had been sitting in silence with a grief too large and a guilt too heavy, and that boy had done the one thing none of the machines could do. He had pointed a man back toward his own heart. Daniel founded a small program the following spring. He called it Songs for the Waiting. Volunteers gathered in hospitals across the Denver area, parents and grandparents and siblings and neighbors, to sit with patients in long-term unconscious states and do what Daniel had done. To talk, to sing, to say the things that had gone unsaid for too long. The medical community could not fully explain the results, but the results came quietly and consistently, again and again. He told his story publicly for the first time at a small community center in Aurora on a Tuesday evening, standing at a folding table with Lily beside him, her hand in his, her feet still not quite reaching the floor. A grandmother in the back row raised her hand when he finished. "Who was the boy?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I know what he did. He didn't perform a miracle. He just reminded me how to be a father." He looked down at Lily. "Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't a machine or a medication or a specialist with a plane ticket. Sometimes it's a voice, the right voice, saying the truth that was always there, waiting to be spoken." Lily looked up at him, and she smiled. Because some doors, no matter how long they have been shut, will open again if the right voice is standing on the other side. And finally, at last, it is no longer afraid to speak. If this story reached something inside you, if it made you think of someone you love, or a moment you wish you could return to, or a truth you have been carrying too long in silence, please subscribe to Beyond the Badge. Every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories of ordinary people who find extraordinary courage in the moments that matter most. Hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and share this story today with someone who needs to hear it. Because some voices were always meant to travel further than one person can carry them alone.